Good afternoon. Today is October 23rd. It's 4 p.m. and we're here for the Administrative Committee meeting. And we have Sandra Kelly here today, and we have Gina Terusio.
You got it.
My brain's on today. Okay, regular agenda. Approval of Administrative Committee September 25, 23 minutes.
They looked fine to me.
Looks good to me. Okay, consent agenda.
Awesome.
Okay. ARPA allocation amendment resolution action item, Bill Belnoff.
Okay, I'm just going to slide over here so I can see the screen. So just to provide a little bit of background on this topic, you may recall President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan Act back in 2021 in March. The measure provides financial assistance for state and local governments in need of relief due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The city of Moscow is a non-entitlement unit, so we have a population of less than 50,000. So we were allocated just a little bit over 5.5 million in ARPA funds during that time. By the summer, so that happened in March, by May, the Treasury had issued what they called the interim final rule that identified the allowable uses of the ARPA funds at that point in time. Much of that was focused on revenue replacement if a local unit government had lost revenue during the time period of the pandemic. It also focused on health measures as well as small business and nonprofit grants, the assistance providing affordable housing, but there was also a large focus on public infrastructure. Both water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure were all identified as being allowed uses. City Council conducted a workshop then in October of 21 to discuss how the city wished to use its ARPA funds, and ultimately passed Resolution 2021 that identified those uses. So that Resolution 2021-25 included $750,000 for small business and nonprofit assistance grants. Any portion of that funding that was not utilized then would move over to water capital funding. $150,000 was allocated for affordable housing assistance through the city's grant program. $1 million was allocated to the city stormwater fund, and that was a combination of the purchase of the jet truck that was necessary for the startup of the stormwater utility, and then some Hog Creek drainage improvements actually were just constructed this summer, along with the Lily and First Street improvements. And then the bulk of the funds, the remaining $3.6 million, was allocated to the city's water capital fund, because at that time that was identified as being the fund that was in the need of the greatest amount of capital funding to complete identified water improvement projects. On April of 2022, the Treasury issued the final rule, so rather than the interim final rule, that it was actually substantially revised. It allowed for other uses, but the most significant change was they provided a standard allowance for any unit of government to assume $10 million of revenue loss that then could be used to be spent on any general governmental services. So again, it became much more broad. It's actually how we converted at the end of the report to say that was going to be how we were going to utilize it. But we still have to report on the actual use, but we just shifted to that category other than the ones we already had. At this point in time, we have determined that the Water Capital Fund is in a better position to fund the necessary improvements for the next 10 years. Right now, with the ARPA funds, it'll have a fund balance forecast by the end of 2024 of a little bit over $9 million. We'll be able to contribute close to 1.5 to 2 million per year, and we only have 10 million of projects identified for the next 10 years. So we're actually sitting in a pretty good position to fund those water system improvements.
That's even with likely inflation and.
Yes, and there will likely be, I'm sure there'll be some cost escalation, but if we're able to contribute somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million for the next 10 years, plus have a base of 9 million, we felt that we could reallocate that 3.7 out and still be able to fund those projects over the horizon. We have also determined there are other governmental services that are in greater financial need, primarily the construction of the expanded city shop facility. Sorry about that.
You're not wrong.
Pardon me. To meet the demand of increased essential public services. And a little bit of background, the existing city shop was constructed back in 1968. It is in poor condition, and many of its core systems are beyond their functional life. Right now, if the air compressor kicks on, the lights dim. We have limited restroom facilities. There are no locker rooms. There are limited break room facilities. It's really in pretty, and the roof leaks. So it's really in pretty poor condition.
Well, my guess is it also limits what we're able to, the support we're able to provide to MPD and others, right? As far as,
Yeah, and this supports every piece of rolling stock that the city operates, every vehicle, every piece of equipment, street functions and operations, park operations. It's essentially all of our frontline operations operate out of the facility. And those maintenance functions and that fleet have grown substantially since 1968, and the building has reached a point of functional obsolescence. We did a facility master plan back in 2016. Currently, the shop is 21,000 square feet in size. That 16 study indicated that we should have roughly just under 77,000 square feet for the functions that are currently occurring in that location. Again, I won't hammer on that too much, but restrooms, safe working spaces, and certainly does not contribute to a professional work environment.
Can I just ask a question? So the study in 2016 recommended 76,000. My question is do we need to update it
that
again
was my question.
for 2023, 2024?
Well, certainly, I think we will want to update that moving forward in the future. We have looked at, so that 76,000 was across all of the functions of the space. What we're anticipating working on with this next phase of the project are just kind of our next first critical components, which would just be fleet and parks. There'll still be needs for other functions out there between largely with streets. So that won't change. But right now, the space that we've identified would accommodate both parks and the fleet space for the foreseeable future. As we talked, the shop is a key facility for delivering all those frontline services. Additionally, during both the 17 and the 19 flooding events, we had water flowing through the building because of its age and the height at which the building was constructed. So I'll show a little bit of video there, but that's the near and dear and loved city shop facility. And this was during that flooding event where you can see we had water intruding the building as Hog Creek left its channel. And then here in a moment, as I look out,
And this is all,
and we had,
I'm sure this is all while these guys are trying to provide sandbags.
so while we're trying to provide,
services our-
you'll see they're filling sandbags in the back, dealing with water flowing through the building at the time. This is not an optimum condition for us to be operating during those times of emergency response. So the 2016 study kind of laid out a master plan for future development of the site. The existing main shop, you can see they're kind of angled on the site there here. So that's the location of the existing shop facility and the existing pump house. So the concept was to essentially build building space around the perimeter. So if you know the site, it's kind of, it's a low-lying area here, then it slopes up to an upper tier. So the idea is taking advantage of the site, building those buildings in to create as much flat space both on the top and the bottom, use those buildings as retainage so we can have those two tiers to the site elevation. So what we're looking at for this first phase of the project would be that location there outlined in red. So we did now about 18 months ago, went through a planning process to identify space needs for both fleet and parks as being the two departments we would tackle first. The portion of the building here located, which would be on the south, is all the fleet facility. That includes the large drive-through bays, training rooms, break rooms, locker rooms, and then this would be the park facility from this point over to the north. And I've got it kind of blown up here a little bit closer. So this would be the fleet facility where you'd have a public reception location. Right now, if somebody wanders out onto the shop property, you have no idea where you're going. There really isn't any type of public reception. And we do have members of the public that like to come out and bring donuts and other thank you gifts during those snow events and flooding events. And so having a place for that to happen is something we'd want to have here. So we have a reception area, a couple offices, a training room, mechanical, electrical, a break room, locker room, and some additional restrooms. And then we have the main service bays, 3 large drive-through service bays, and then a couple fabrication shop, a storage bay, and then a wash bay for vehicles laid out for that portion of the facility. Parks space a little bit smaller, but again has reception, offices, computer workstations for staff to have access to log in their work orders and tasks they're doing, restroom facilities, locker facilities, a larger break room to handle the seasonal influx of temporary employees. We typically have seasonal employees during that time period, and then additional shop, mechanic, welding, and finish shop space for parks activities. So just a couple elevations kind of showing the front of the building and the rear. And then we had some illustrations just to kind of get a sense of how that would fit on the sites, what the building would look like. That would be that kind of public entry location. So we take the Van Buren side as being that public entry, kind of cordon that off to a parking lot, have an office space where the people come in, and then we'd kind of shift the main operational access over to Polk.
Can you remind me, Polk is not, what is our primary entrance right now for the shop?
So right now it's
access?
off of Van Buren. So if you look here on the site, so primarily this is our primary
I know we have-
entrance, is
we
right
have
off of Van
gates-
Buren.
Gates behind, right?
Yep. So
Okay.
we would more fully develop this entry to make this be the operational where heavy trucks, plows, dump trucks, and equipment would be gaining access to the site without having to drive down Van Buren. And then we'd make the Van Buren kind of that public reception, have a parking lot where the public can go in and not have them just kind of drive out into the operating
Yeah.
space of the shop facility.
For the neighbors on Van Buren would love that.
And you say the main will be on Polk.
Polk.
Perfect.
Correct.
Okay.
So just some illustrations of what the building would look like.
Cool. It's lovely.
So the ARPA funds are required, as the council is aware, to be obligated by the end of 24 and expended by the end of 2026. We did budget for the design of the city shop facility in the FY24 budget. That RFQ has been issued. I think it's November 9th. Statements of qualifications are due. We then select a architect to do the final design on the project, and the goal would be to get it out to bid by summer for award by the end of the year in 2024. So those funds can be contracted and obligated for the project. Right now, the project cost is estimated right about $5 million. And so between what we've kind of have some existing accumulations in the capital fund and then this 3.7 million back from the water capital fund, we'd have adequate funding to construct the project. The construction we anticipate likely could either start fall of 24 or spring of 25. It's actually a relatively easy site to work on because it's pretty well contained as far as erosion control tracking. So we can certainly work with the contractor to find out what would work best for their schedule. And then we would likely complete in 25 and close out any remaining items early 26. So we'd have that all taken into account. So staff has prepared a resolution for the council that was help amend or would amend or replace the prior resolution 2021-25. And it just would be directing to reallocate the 3.768, which was the original 3.6 million plus 140,000 of the nonprofit small business that was not utilized from water capital to the general fund for general governmental services. And with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions the committee might have.
Questions?
I don't have any. Thank you.
I don't have any. I have questions as whether or not that can go on the consent agenda, and I don't.
We can go on regular, it's fine.
It seems
I
to
think
me it has to
it'd
go on
be
the
a good
regular
one to go on regular.
Yeah, it just seems to me that it's something we all voted for, and we all had that everybody should have a say in that,
Mhm.
and so it should be.
I think
It's
it
my
sounds good to
sense.
me.
Yeah. You'd prefer on regular?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would too. I'm game for
Yeah.
that. I have one question, and I'll preface this with when we were redoing our organizing of tiered projects, City Shop was number one for me. I'm really excited to see it here because I was worried that it wasn't going to be doable in the next few years. And so, point of clarification, let's say ARPA wasn't on the table, would a bond be the only way to build a shop of this
Yeah,
scale?
at this point in time, I don't think we'd be able to accumulate enough funding to be
Yeah.
able to do it ourselves. And so we'd have to likely try to have the voters approve a bond. It could be potentially difficult
Mhm.
as a bond measure. So I think this really is our one and
Yeah.
Only.
best, I won't say
Best.
only, but best opportunity.
I'm excited about it. My only other question is with whatever repairs and updates needed for like the downtown corridor, are there any concerns about other projects that were large ticket as far as like street improvements or things like that that we need to consider? Because I'm all in for the shop. I just want to understand if there's other things that it could have been used for if we weren't setting the rest of the piggy bank aside.
I would
for
say
it.
the downtown streetscape would be the one, but that one was a $26 million
Yeah.
project. So this
Yeah.
3.7 wouldn't even get us
Mhm.
partially down the road.
Yeah.
I think for the long term for the city, for the delivery of the central services, this is our better investment right now.
I agree. I'm game.
I don't think that the downtown streetscape was ready to be.
Wasn't it
We were
printed?
far, far away from any kind of cohesion on that. So I do think this
Yeah.
is a good use of our.
And
More
given the
funds.
need to obligate it by 24 and extend it
Certainly.
by 26, I think we would not want to try to rush that
Agreed.
downtown project, even if this was close enough to fund it.
Right.
I think you're seeing some of that, just to the west of us.
Yeah.
Indeed.
And I have another question. I'm guessing that the RFQ will be a fairly easy one because is it the case that any architects going for the bid would be able to inherit whatever plans
Yep,
from
it's all our
2016
work
are?
product. Actually, it's actually in the RFQ, so they understand the scope and the programming. So from a perspective of the design, we already have the programmatic layout and schematic design already done. So
Cool.
Good.
it should be a fairly simple project for us to execute, get final construction put together, our final construction plans put together, and get it out to bid. Just because we have good background work, we've worked with all the departments affected, had them review it, make sure it had all the elements they needed. And so it should be a fairly straightforward design process.
Groovy. Yeah, I think regular agenda sounds great with recommend to approve. I think it'll be impactful for our viewers at home to watch the flood footage as well again. So that sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks to Sandra for getting us started. I was gabbing with Megan Cherry downstairs and my clock was slow. So item number 3, personnel policy updates resolution with Bonnie. Hi, Bonnie.
Hello. I don't have a fancy presentation. Thanks,
No
Bill, for
flooding.
writing me
You
out
had
on
lots of
that.
documents for us, so that's all right.
There are lots of documents. Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me go through all this. So, since I started back in February, I've been working with our employee advisory committee, as well as Bill and leadership just to identify and work through policy updates. So there were some specific policies that were identified through EAC that they either had questions on, wanted some clarification, or just kind of some changes to them. And then as I have been just working through normal personnel policies or processes, there's been some additional edits and changes to policies that we are looking at moving forward and making either amendments to our current policies, or there are going to be some requests for some kind of repeals of some of the policies that are currently in there. So it's definitely a number of them, and I'm happy to just kind of go through them just to highlight kind of the basis where the change came from, and then highlighting the predominant change being made. We are looking at 3 of our chapters. So chapter 5, which goes through legal requirements, chapter 7, which is our hours of work, and chapter 8, which identifies a number of leave provisions. So within chapter 5, there's only one request for change within that chapter that is under section 2C4, which is related to our post-accident drug testing. The prior policy that was approved through resolution back in December, so resolution 2022-30, there was a change made where it created where any accident whatsoever, regardless of the impact, or was required to go through drug and alcohol testing. That has created a little bit of a burden on some of our employees, especially just for those really minor accidents that might happen just on our facility sites. So that request came through EAC for evaluation of that policy to make any updates and to kind of expand it out. So what we looked at doing then was just to expand for specific criteria in which drug and alcohol testing would be required after post-accident. And that actually really mirrors a lot of what we currently do for our CDL drivers through the Department of Transportation. So our kind of the history prior to last year's policy update, this actually goes back more in line with what some of our previous policy was, just to align with that Department of Labor or Department of Transportation.
I imagine we'd see a little bit of
NCDL.
cost savings as well on the city side from administering
Yeah,
fewer tests.
Yeah,
in
I
that
mean, and it's not going to, for the most part, I mean, we are still going to be getting the bulk of the accidents that happen because as you see, I mean, we still have a number of areas where we're going to be requiring that post-accident. It is definitely any type of an accident that occurs on a public
Certainly.
roadway, public or private, loss of human life, any motor vehicle that gets disabling. And then we did up if there's an accident that results in damage of $2,500 or more. So that was a change from the previous amount. I think previously it was $1,500.
1,500.
We moved it up to $2,500 based on our current deductible
Oh, sure.
cost there. And then also ensuring that if a supervisor has reasonable suspicion that an individual is under the influence, that also would require post-accident drug testing.
We reviewed the accidents for the prior since the 2022 policy was adopted, and about 70% would have met that prior damage threshold. So as far as if you look at a reduction of testing, maybe by 30%, because they would have, once you get into that 1,500, it's pretty easy to get to the 2,500 level. So
Yeah.
we probably see about a 30% reduction of testing.
Okay, so just to follow up on her question, then it's really not a cost-saving measure. It's much more just an efficiency level.
I think probably a little bit of both. So there is definitely going to be a cost savings because of the time in which it takes for us to have an individual who, and it may not even be I'm like literally at the top of my head trying to think of an example here of a situation that came up
We had
where,
like a police officer slid into a fence post, knocked off a couple of fence boards.
yeah.
It was going to be a $200 damage, and they had to have another officer come escort them down to get drug tested, go through that process.
yeah.
And so there were a couple of the minors. Again, the majority of the accidents would have met our prior damage threshold, but there were a number of fairly small ones that, I think there was a desire to move back to having a damage threshold.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah. So some of it is also like the time of having, current city employees having to come and then look at the damage and evaluate. So just a couple of different parameters there.
Will we monitor this and kind of watch? I mean, I hear the reasons, but I also see the other side of that. And having worked at or done the smart transit gig that we did, there's a degree of caution that I think is really important and appropriate. And so
Yeah.
I do, if there's a way that we can maybe annually or biannually kind of look at things so we don't get to the point where we're ignoring.
Yeah. So some of the things
We're
that
not ignoring, but
some of the things that I am looking at doing, if we do move this one forward for updates to the policy, is we will be providing a couple of additional things for our supervisors as well as employees that are driving. So number one, we do need to increase the level of training that they're receiving just related to safety and driving. We're also going to be doing supervisory trainings on how to assess for the damage component as well as reasonable suspicion. And so really trying to put a little bit more of a focus on how are we educating and training our employees in regards to not get into these types of accidents so that we can try to create some type of proactivity, because I agree with you, we do also need to be monitoring it. So, I mean, we will be evaluating to see kind of every year where are we looking at from our liability standpoint, where are, how many accidents, where are we sitting, and then do we need to increase training? Do we need to relook at the policy? What is it that we need to look at so that we can then start to mitigate some of that?
And we recently had a review with iCrimp on our claims for the last 5 years. And I think of the vehicle accidents, there were probably 30% were backing related,
oh yeah,
backing into things.
that is totally.
iCrimp wants to take reverse out of our vehicles. If we can do it.
No longer. I understand backing into stuff. Not that I ever do that, but and I get sliding
But other
into
people
fence
do.
posts. Other people totally do that. But then I think we get into some gray area with caution there. I totally understand the things that are, you're not,
Yeah.
icy roads are a nightmare. So I get that. And I'm glad to hear that you kind of got it built in and you're going to look at where the pain points are.
Yeah.
So good. That makes me.
Yeah. I definitely think that that's going to be key to making sure that we're staying on top of our processes and our policy surrounding them.
Good. Okay.
Any other questions on section 1 focusing on post-accident testing?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Section 2. What do we
All
got?
right,
Chapter
well,
7.
So for section 2, we're looking at chapter 7, section 2, which is work periods. This is a really, really minor edit that needs to be made, and it's specific to basically our work weeks. So our policy has our work weeks beginning at midnight on Sunday, running through Saturday. However, our current practice and our payroll system runs Monday through Sunday. So this really is just a update to ensure that we are following what we are currently
Great.
doing
Nice.
within the city.
Good.
Any concerns on section 2? Questions?
Hopefully that didn't take very long to figure out, right? That was
No.
an easy one.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's interesting too, because, right, like it's not until somebody comes with a question or you're looking at something. And so it did come up because there was a question that came up, and then looking at it, I'm like, wait, this is
Mismatch.
different from what our pay periods are. We need these to match. So, I mean, especially if we were to get audited or from any type of a compliance standpoint. So,
All right, section 3.
Good catch.
Yeah, no kidding. Section 3 with regards to chapter 7 and section 5. What do we got?
all right. So with this one, we are looking at section 5, our on-call and callback. This was another one that came both from EAC as well as kind of some supervisors. We did a couple of things with the edits here. Number one, since we were already looking at it, we did just make kind of some administrative updates and edits to how the policy and section itself was written. However, it was to clarify on the on-call and callback compensation, specifically that compensation may be taken as comp time, but at the discretion and based on the budgetary availability of comp time within those specific supervisory departments. And then the same also with callback. With on-call compensation, this one was most predominant, and it's because our on-call system currently, we have multiple individuals that are on-call, and you can get called back for different department on-call reasons. So for example, if streets gets called back for water, then how do you compensate if they're getting called back on a water budget if you're going to do it as comp time? Comp time is
Sure.
typically banked, and then it's used at a later date, and it comes off of what that employee's general fund type is. So that was the purpose behind needing to make some modifications and edits to that language, is to specify that it cannot just be automatically taken as comp time. It's either going to be paid, or obviously if streets is calling you back from streets, that might be a discussion with your supervisors as far as taking it as comp time. But comp time needs additional approvals specifically in those situations so that we're not misfunding that.
So my question was, sometimes we get these little notices that come out and says, this is who's on call for the parks
Mhm.
this weekend. So the question then is do you get compensated just because you're on call?
Mhm. Yes.
And then if you get called in, you get a different compensation
Correct.
for that as well.
Correct.
That makes perfect sense.
And prior to the updates of 2022, on-call and callback was all required to be paid out at overtime.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
So part of the change we made in 22 was to allow the opportunity, because there were some that were dissatisfied that they couldn't use it for comp time, say the police department, when they shifted to having to pay overtime for everything for the detectives that are on call. That blew through their overtime budget.
Yeah.
I see.
They
Yeah.
wanted it to have the flexibility to be able to use comp time as the compensation for
That's
on-call
fair.
time.
Yeah.
The intent was always to leave it to the supervisor's discretion, because there's some very small departments that if employees accumulate a bunch of comp time, that means
Can afford to have
they're
them
going to be
take the leave,
gone
right?
and
Mhm.
afford
Right.
that. And so this was just intended to reinforce that it is up to the supervisor's discretion based on the department's necessity, budget constraints, and operational needs.
So if somebody is actually on call, is there requirements in terms of how far they have to be away from a certain location, as well as how much they can't drink, they can't do certain things when they're on call?
Yeah, when you're on call, there's a number of things that are limited based on that on-call status. So you need to be accessible, available, and able to report to duty if called. But it does also include limiting, obviously, things that you may be doing that could prevent you from being accessible and able to come in if you were in an on-call status. So, yeah.
And in looking at it, I don't see that specific verbiage. Do you feel like you need to have that verbiage further outlined outside of how it's
So
phrased?
there is a response time that is
Yeah, the 30
provided, the
minutes
30
and then-
minutes, but also managed by each department division.
Okay.
Some may have a different response time. So that's the general provision. But if they have to be, I think I guess I would hope it'd go without saying that if they're on call and are required to report to work within 30 minutes, that they would be in a condition to be
Yeah.
able to work.
As long as you don't foresee any
Because if they
concerns.
did, then they
I'm
would violate
cool with it.
the
ready to
Drug
work
and
part of
alcohol,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah, there are, in looking at this, I think that, sorry, I didn't mean to
No, no,
interrupt
no,
you.
I can get in line. I'm okay.
So in looking at this and talking with some supervisors, there are, just like Bill was saying, there are some departmental processes and practices because they are the ones that kind of administer what their on-call provisions look like. So that is an area where I've gotten questions just in terms of making some updates or modifications to how they have their on-call rotation scheduled and then what those expectations are that they're putting out for their specific employees that are in that on-call capacity. So I do anticipate over this next year, that's going to be another departmental expectation that we're going to be
Have it documented.
working on and getting some more things solidified there.
That was going to be my question. You know, do you have a set of criteria or a set of guidelines for supervisors to make that call? You know, because I want to eliminate pain points, right, between, you know, putting the onus on the employee and making the supervisor the bad guy. And how do you,
Yeah, and I think that there's
Yeah.
definitely a number of departments that do have some specific guidelines that they have set that are a little bit more formalized versus some others that don't quite have that formalized. And those are the things that we've got to evaluate and look at.
Yeah.
So to say, yes, we absolutely do right now, I think that there is definitely some areas where we've got to look at and make sure that we have some template guidelines that departments
Yeah,
and areas can
agree.
use.
it'd be cool if it was kind of more HRs
Mhm.
rather than 16 different.
Yeah, there's definitely a number of templates that I have a list of things that I'm working through. So
Cool. Okay, good.
Any more questions on Chapter 7, Section 5 about on-call and callback edits? Okay, and I see Section 4 is for creating a new section within Chapter 7.
yeah, so section 4 is creating a shift differential section. This is a process that has been informal throughout the city for a number of years. In fact, the PD has a more formal shift differential, and theirs is, oh my gosh, why can't I think of the amount of
Trying to recall, it was $125 or $150 per pay
they
period.
get? Yeah, I think they get 150 per pay period that
As a
they
flat.
as a flat amount for shift differential. So one of the things that we did with this is the PD has done continual reviews of what that shift differential looks like for their offices over the last number of
I'm
years.
sure for competitive reasons too,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so they have really stayed in line with kind of theirs. On the flip side, we have other departments that do utilize shift differential as well.
Okay.
So shift differential specifically for individuals that are scheduled
Mm.
to be working from, in between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. So that is kind of the hours of work. So the your predominant schedule, so the majority of your schedule needs to be in between that time to qualify for shift differential. And that's a pretty standardized process just throughout employers. Yep.
So does an employee have the ability to decline being on call?
So this is different from on-call. This is shift differential. So individuals who are scheduled, their hours that are scheduled are during those specific times. A lot. So for example, with PD, they do rotations for
Yeah,
shift
right.
differential so that not just one group of employees is on shift differential because it tends to be a less desirable shift. The same goes for some of our other departments. They also do rotations of those shift differential schedules. So individuals pretty much, unless there was to be an accommodation in which they would need to submit that they couldn't be on that type of a rotation,
right.
then everybody is on that type of rotation.
I was just thinking about like single parents and things like that. That may be a difficult thing to suddenly have to have backup for every time you could be on.
And so really there's only two departments that this affects. It's police department and it's streets.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
streets only seasonally during snow removal operations. And even with streets, they don't do the kind of 3-month rotation that PD does.
Right, it's all hands on
It's
deck.
very short
Yeah.
durations and they have a limited number of people that cover that night shift. The purpose here was just to document kind of our past practice, define it. What does it mean? What hours, work
Mhm.
hours, what
Count
percentage
hours.
your work hours outside of what window, and kind of formalize that process. And what we found was, streets is still paying the $25 per pay period that the PD started with 10 years ago.
Mm.
PD's been escalating theirs every
Yeah.
year to
Yeah.
now they're at 150 and streets is still paying 25 for this shift differential. And we wanted to formalize that process moving forward and make sure that we were keeping everything on par.
Any,
That's like a good thing to catch.
yeah, any concerns about a budgetary impact if we are going to look at an escalate, like if we're, I know it's going to depend on the snow season, I would imagine, but any concerns about impact to budget?
Relatively, for the street side, it's relatively few. When we're actually doing snow removal, people are in. This is just having
Yeah.
a couple people there at night to be able to monitor and be able to respond quickly. When we have an event, we're always
Oh,
paying
because they would
those
qualify
hours.
as on-call. I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
The
because
street-
most of our major events, we're paying
Got
for
it.
that time no matter what.
Okay,
This is for people who actually have the bulk of their hours scheduled overnight to be on call to do
Got it.
cleanup, ice, de-icing, other activities through the course of the night. So it's a relatively few number of labor hours. And theirs will be less than PD because they're doing a full 2-week, shift of night shift for extended duration for a greater number of employees.
So yeah, so this section really was just to formalize an informal process that we're already doing
love that.
and to set some parameters, obviously, around ensuring that we are evaluating and how individuals are going to be receiving their shift differential compensation.
Any other questions for a new section 8 as presented?
No.
All right, Groovy. Section 5, we have chapter 8, section 1.
All right,
I have
so
lots of questions on this one.
okay,
so-
sounds good. So this one is specifically related to our leaves of absence. So the edits and modifications with this is this section, the intent behind it is to identify areas in which leave without pay could be utilized. And so the intent was just to update this section so it clarified in terms of situations and circumstances that allowed for leave without pay, to update the title itself to indicate that it's leave of absence without pay because that is what it's related to. And then a number of the edits that were made is the current policy is referencing federal regulations in terms of our obligations under federal and not related back to local government or the city of Moscow. And so the edits, some of the edits that are made are to basically identify what our current practice is as a local government with the parameters that we have.
Let me ask you a question on that. And maybe I just misread it someplace. So that we provide 6 weeks of parental leave.
Mhm.
The question is, that's in addition, and then when you're done with that, then you can use your sick leave, you can use something else.
So for specifically for the parental leave, correct. Yeah, so the parental leave is a city paid leave provision that is available for the parental leave. So yeah, so you can utilize your parental leave and that then you can utilize that prior to the use of any other type of paid leave.
And is there any limit in terms of how much time one can take using sick leave?
In terms of
Parental leave.
for parental leave, with parental leave, it wouldn't qualify. I mean, so parental leave is city paid leave. So it has nothing to do, you're not utilizing your sick leave. You have 6 weeks of parental leave, 240 hours. So it is completely separate than sick leave. So if we're talking about sick leave as it relates back to family medical leave and like being gone for maternity leave and those types of things, then there are provisions related to that for the family medical leave side of it. Family medical leave in and of itself is a leave without pay
Right.
process. And then we are basically what we want is we want our employees to be as least impacted as possible if they have to be out for a family medical leave action. And so we want them to take as much leave, whether it be parental leave or any of their accrued leave, sick or vacation. So as long as it fits within those parameters, it would just depend on what is being communicated from their healthcare provider, or ultimately up to the 12 weeks of paid leave if they used it for the FML provision or FML related things, which is probably one that we can get to as we're talking more about that versus the leave without pay section. Yeah.
Yeah, because it looks like more than anything, we wanted to split out and really make sure that the FMLA conversation was separate from the leave without pay piece. 'Cause we're not-
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because what you're going to see is what we're saying is there's a number of reasons that you can use leave without pay. We do want to limit leave without pay. And the reason for that is because if we have an individual that is in leave without pay status for an entire pay period, it impacts
Their
benefit
benefits ability-
contributions.
Yeah. Okay.
They then have to pay their benefit contributions out of pocket, which it's substantial if you're having to pay that out of pocket and not through a paycheck.
Right.
So the intent behind this this policy, I think, was to identify what are those circumstances that are we are required to allow an individual to use leave without pay. We cannot control that an individual uses leave without pay because we have federal regulations and guidelines that say, no, employees are entitled to leave without pay. So we don't want to remove that, but we definitely want to help them be not as impacted. So
It feels like a clearer read as far as what is an eligible reason to ask for leave without pay. I was going to ask, I see that we added item F, which talks about in other limited circumstances, the approval of the city supervisor. That one caught my eye. Have we needed to use that before? Is that just meant to be a safeguard in case like someone's supervisor is gone or something and we just need someone to make the call?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally you'll run into situations where somebody couldn't have been. We've had this with maybe newly hired employees who don't have much accumulated leave, who get injured off
yeah.
the job, who want to retain employment status, but we can't pay them if they're an hourly employee. So there may be some limited instances where we can approve that and work
Yeah.
with them to pay for their benefits if they have any benefit costs out of pocket, and work through the process. So it just gives us some flexibility for those oddball cases.
And if this is a rabbit hole like in Self Park, because my other question was I'm not super clear on how the workman's comp piece
Yeah.
works, and I know that's a very
Workers'
sticky
comp.
workers
Yeah.
comp. And so my understanding is that it kind of just triggers a pause for city while all of those things are going through, and then if that is all vetted and
Mhm.
approved, then we then can issue payment, or does that end up coming
Yep.
from the workers' comp
both.
agency? Okay.
It comes through both.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is a lot of times with the workers' comp, there's the 5 days that we
The waiting
cannot,
to-
yeah, so we as a city cannot pay. The employee can utilize leave if they have it, but we have to put a hold as they're going through their workers' comp claim to then determine, is it
Is
something where
a-
they're released back and they're able to basically work in a capacity, which therefore isn't impacting because they're not having to collect it from anywhere, or is it a partial disability, partial temporary disability that's been caused, and then what does that look like? So yes, it's kind of
We're not
a
leaving them high and dry.
combination.
It's meant to clarify the
Correct.
hierarchy of what happens within
Yeah.
which system. Okay. Any other questions on the leave without pay updates? All right, we got section 6, which is update to chapter 8, sections 2 and 5, which is repealing them.
Yes, so for the leave approval, repealing that because all of the leave approval processes are in the actual leave sections that they relate to.
Okay.
So if we're looking at what is the process for approving family medical leave, that is in the family medical leave policy. If we are looking at what's in holiday or vacation or sick leave, again, those are all within the sick leave policies. It's just redundant information. So the recommendation
One
is
more
that
place where you can leave something that's contradictory.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, it's clear to employees who maybe are skimming the policy
In terms of,
where to find their answers.
well, I mean,
I mean, that's
That's what
going to
you
be.
call HR.
Call
You call
that.
HR. That's it.
I
Run
mean,
down.
Besides calling you, I mean, there are going to be people that skip over the big paragraphs.
yeah, I mean, so I would say if an employee is asking, and I mean, just to say like, how do those questions come up?
Right.
An employee would call and say, hey, I have questions regarding how I need to request approval for family medical leave.
Right.
I don't think that they're going to look at this and say, oh, the leave approval policy is what's going to tell me. They're going to be looking at family
Right.
medical leave.
Right.
So I think that was the thought behind it, is that we're already identifying it there, and we want employees to go to that section
Section,
because it
right.
does clarify within there what
Okay.
that process is.
We don't have to idiot proof it. I'm just
No.
just
No,
feeling
that's
like
right.
Those
maybe
are
we
great
were-
questions because it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. We have employees that are like, I looked through the entire policy and I didn't see anything on the sick leave bank. And you're like, did you look at the sick leave bank policy? And they're like, we have a sick leave bank policy.
Yeah.
Yes,
Where I
we
looked at
do.
all
Like,
three.
so
that paragraph.
don't get me wrong.
If it streamlines for you, I'm game. Any other questions for those repeal proposals?
No.
Okay, section 7 is in regards to our chapter 8, section 9 updates.
All right, so that is in relation to the parental leave. So within that, the intent, okay, there was a couple of areas where there just needed to be some clarification. So in the current policy, sorry, I'm just looking at how it's worded in the current policy so I can show you the difference there. So if you look the current policy under the eligibility D number 3, the very last sentence there is the amount of leave permitted with this benefit will be deducted from the employee's FML entitlement. It's hidden there. It's really like that's super, when in reality, parental leave is and may be intertwined with family medical leave. So it really was just to move that up. It's because I actually got a question on this and I was like, I had to scour this policy. It was hidden. I thought that that was just, it really didn't make it easy for our employees that would be looking at the policy to understand that this is part of, it can be part of FML. It also may not be part of FML. So there are situations where if you've already exhausted your FML for some other reason, and then you have to go out on parental leave, you're still entitled to parental leave. It's not going to be covered under family medical leave, but it's going to be covered under parental leave, right? But if you have not exhausted any of your family medical leave, parental leave would be used in conjunction with family medical leave. So it was just to clarify a couple of sections. That was one of them, as well as to identify for parental leave use of intermittent or individuals who are wanting to use intermittent leave. So intermittent leave
Like
would be
spread it out.
Yeah, you want to spread it out over
Yeah,
a period of time.
absolutely.
That just needs to get approval before you do it, and that's similar to family medical leave as well. So I'm just trying to clarify a couple of sections in the parental leave policy.
What is intermittent?
Intermittent is where
Wow.
you're taking it over. So intermittent can be that you're taking it like one day a week. So it's not all continuous. It's taken intermittently throughout a
So, like,
period
if
Right,
of
you're
so
looking
time.
it's
at
a little more scheduled medical leave.
Yeah.
Or like if your spouse, if you have birthed a child, we see this a lot at work. You've birthed a child and you get X number of leave, and your spouse, you maybe don't want your spouse around for a hot second, or you need help waiting, and if you don't have
I get it.
a daycare opening until
Mhm.
4 months down the line, you're able to
You can.
the,
Yeah,
the
that's all on
spouse
the-
who maybe didn't birth could go back to work and then
Yeah. I mean, there are still
it later.
parameters because parental leave can only be used within the first 6 months of birth versus like FML that can be used for up, to the first year. So there are some differences. There are some ways that there are some parameters set up, even from that intermittent standpoint. You can use it intermittently, but only for those first 6 months.
I get it. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions on the updates to paid parental leave? All right, and then we've got let's look. Chapter 8, section, what is that, 14? Is that right?
14,
Okay,
yeah.
for sick leave bank.
For sick leave banks. So within sick leave, I know I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so many policies.
Thank you for going through all of this with a fine tooth comb. You're making it easy for us, honestly.
It's like, we'll be here for a while, right? All right. So again, to clean up some things, but specifically what the intent was to incorporate the workers' comp component into the sick leave bank, because in addition to being able to utilize it. So you still have to have contributed to the sick leave bank, and sick leave bank is used for catastrophic purposes, but we also utilize it for workers' comp as well. So if we have an individual that, again, they are low on their leave, that they may be able to then also utilize and pull from the sick leave bank
During that 5-day window.
during actually any
Okay.
part of their workers' comp. One of the things with workers' comp, what it does is if you are in that partial disability and you are receiving, you can then also submit your what you're getting from workers' comp to kind of buy back some of that leave. So not only does it allow for an individual to kind of like try to stay whole for the most part, but they
Be
can
a two-way exchange.
kind of a
Okay.
little bit of a two-way exchange there. But it really was just to clarify and to put into the policy specific parameters for using it for workers' comp situations, and then how the sick leave bank is administered for in general, as well as for the workers' comp provisions of it.
And I have a question on,
Yeah.
so I think it's on the updated one, item J says, if the city of Moscow discontinues the sick leave bank, employees who are members in good standing will be credited 8 hours of sick leave to their accounts.
Mhm.
Is that just to make sure we are covered if in the case I can't imagine, things change. It may not make sense for us to have a sick leave bank in this way, but I have concerns if someone's been giving 8 years into this, or 8 hours of sick leave into the bank repeatedly over a very long career and then all of a sudden it goes away. That
All you're giving is 8 hours, so you actually only
Okay,
put
so it's
8
not
hours. You
One
buy
time.
in. Yep.
got it.
You
Okay.
buy in one time 8 hours, and that is it.
So it's not okay. It is truly meant to be a wash where we can
Yeah.
outline what the disbursement would be if this ever goes away.
Yeah,
Got
and then
it,
we
okay.
did clarify that if you are an individual that has previous, because once you've used the sick leave bank, you can still use it. You're eligible for it. I mean, we have the parameters in there, but we did say that if there was a situation where we removed it and you have used and pulled from that bank, you would not be eligible to receive that 8
Okay.
hours back.
In good stand. Okay, that makes more
Yeah.
sense. I gotta figure out which this cryptic note to myself was. Oh, I wrote a note to myself that said the phrasing in section 1, is it section 1 of this? I wrote is available to, then criteria for usage, why two separate ones is the note I wrote to myself. Let me look.
You
and
gonna
see if I
translate
can-
that to us?
Yeah, let me decrypt my own note.
No worries.
Sorry, I'm eligibility and criteria for sick leave, bank administration. What did I mean by that, Haley?
You under C?
Yeah, I was looking at, B1, the sick leave bank is available to,
Mhm.
and then criteria for usage. Yeah, I don't know why I wrote that note to myself because it seems like it's pretty clear why we have two separate ones. So maybe we can disregard.
Or if you think of it, then you can ask.
Yeah. Great, Haley. Don't what past Haley was trying to do for future Haley there. Any other questions on section 14 in chapter 8? Excellent. Section 9, our updates for chapter 8, section 15.
Okay. So for our workers' compensation, so again, same thing. The intent was to make sure we updated the sick leave bank policy. So we also wanted to make sure it was reflected in the workers' comp. And then in addition to that, it was just clarifying there was just some administrative cleanup with the workers' comp sections of it, and specifically there were items that were missing that are required through a workers' comp program, and specifically it was identifying and detailing out that 5-day period. And so I wanted to make sure that that was in there, that was clear, as it is related back to our workers' comp regulations. So just wanting to make sure that that was out there, and individuals knew. We get questions from employees that are on workers' comp in terms of, well, why do I have to take leave? Like, why did I have to do that? And again, it goes back to this is federal regulations regarding, related back to workers' comp and what, as an employer, we are and are not able to compensate during that waiting period. And so making sure that we're just in compliance and detailing that in our policy, if there was to ever be questions.
I do have two questions on this
Yep.
one. We've got under medical treatment, I think on the new one, we talk about in the event. So item B, number 2, in the event that the employee's injury requires treatment outside of regular work hours. And then it goes on to say, contact the supervisor to report the treatment. Do you need to further clarify if it's like, okay for a spouse to report this? I'm thinking if someone gets injured on the job and they are not, if they are not the one who's able to report to the supervisor, and maybe I'm overthinking it, I think the wording allows for whomever to notify,
Yeah.
but my
Yeah.
thought was,
I mean, I would definitely say that I think we definitely have it worded in a way where we would allow for that. And we definitely, an individual, it does not say that, but I could see where that might be a point of clarification when we're doing training on it, in terms of just talking with supervisors.
to make sure they know that if they, of course, if you get a
Yeah.
phone call from a spouse and says,
Yeah. And
Jeannie got injured on the job, like you respond, of course.
yeah.
but-
And I also think some of it is, that is what would happen, right? I think
Yeah,
in
yeah.
almost 100% of the situations we would have
right.
a spouse or somebody would be contacting
Right.
work to say, this is what's going on.
Someone's really
Right, of course, yeah.
Excuse me. You don't get it because you can't talk. I
Yeah.
don't think so.
Yeah, I would hope that if we were at that point, that obviously an injury would have happened while they were on the job,
Right.
and so we wouldn't be there. But I think it does still allow for
Right.
that. But I think it is a point that when we do go out, and we kind of put together what that information and training resources are, that we do highlight for supervisors to know what to do in those situations.
Ruby. And then I wrote another note. I'm trying to figure out which clause this was in regards to. If there was a need to further state documentation for hospitalization may be needed. I know it's referenced, I think, further down as far as like returning to work.
Yeah, it is under in terms of requires overnight hospitalization. So I think in compensation number 1 is where it talks about that.
But it just
requires
states
overnight, yeah.
what they would or wouldn't
So,
be. So
yeah.
I don't know if you need that as additional.
What would end up happening actually in this case is that if we had an individual that ended up being injured and being hospitalized, or they needed to be out for a significant, it is going to not only be covered under workers' comp, but we're going to end up actually tracking it under family medical leave as well.
which triggers that paperwork
And that would
requirement?
trigger that paperwork that's
Okay.
going to require for the healthcare provider,
Groovy.
or we'll be receiving that through SIF, our standard insurance, who oversees our workers' comp processes. So we would be getting it one way or another.
Excellent. Any other questions on section 15?
We're so close.
I
Look at
love it.
us.
All right, next up is section 10 in our document outlines changes proposed for chapter 8, section 16 for a repeal.
Yeah, that's just going to be a repeal. So it looks like with our workers' comp section, then there was a compensation for workers' comp. That's now included in our workers' comp. So
Great.
I'm not sure why it was separated out that way. We just combined it. So requesting to repeal that.
Any concerns? Okay.
No.
Section 11 are proposed changes for chapter 8, section 17. You guys are really testing my Roman numeral understanding right
I'm
now.
kind of impressed with it.
11,
I'm like,
wow.
go girl, 14, I would have never known.
Let's see. Okay. What do we have? It's under, so this is FMLA.
This is under our family
Right.
medical leave, yes. So with this, there was in the current policy, the policy definitely goes into detail regarding what FML is. But what I wanted to make sure that we did is talk about how we administer FML within the city of Moscow. And so that was what the majority of the updates to the family medical leave updates did, is just to detail, for example, one of the sections when you're looking at, I think it's under like taking paid or unpaid leave, it says,
Yeah, I
it refers
had a
it
question
back
on that.
to our paid leave policies, which the paid leave policies don't address it. And so it was just to clarify within the current policy that we're dealing with what that was. And of course, now I'm like,
I think it's C4 is the update that says the city will maintain group health plan benefits for employees on FMLA. And then I don't know
yeah,
what it was before, but
yeah, there was just some.
and allowing for the avenue that if an employee needs to be arranged for their own payment of the benefit, that
Yeah.
it can be. Okay.
Yeah. And it was like section B, leave entitlement, part 4. It specifically says an employee's ability to substitute accrued paid leave is determined by terms and conditions of the employer's normal leave policy. Well, it wasn't, it's not in our normal leave policy.
Got it. There's a
So
gap. Okay.
It's a gap.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a little bit of, when I looked at them, going back and forth between what we're actually referencing to ensure that either there's information there that clarifies what an employee may be requesting versus us needing to put it in that policy. So it was to clarify a lot of that, and then also just to track and update the way in which we are administering family medical leave.
I have one question on this
Yep.
one. For page 24, we've got item number 4. It says if FMLA is for the birth, adoption, or foster placement of a child, the use of intermittent or reduced schedule leave requires prior departmental approval. My only question is, and I don't know how often this comes up, in the case of fostering, I know you don't always have a whole lot of notice, and I imagine our department heads are in a place to want to be empowered to help them.
Mhm.
Any concerns about listing it as prior department approval, because I don't know how much prior counts as if someone's getting.
Yeah, I
someone
know
needs to
that
be out.
when, and I will say when we, I mean, I definitely see, I'm like, I can see for that one specifically what you're saying.
It's a
I
it's a
think
corner
the
case. I
reference,
know.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of like, I mean,
I'm assuming if we're in the case where someone is applying for FMLA because they've had
Mhm.
a foster placed with them and they need to take the time, that we'd maybe be in a situation where they're entering sick leave, and then we'd just be looking at.
yeah,
Retroactively
we might
adjusting
end
as
up
needed for
doing a
FMLA.
retroactive. And
Okay.
keep in mind that this is just for a request to work an ongoing intermittent or reduced schedule.
Okay.
So I would say it basically is prior to you doing it, you need to have approval from your
Great.
supervisor. And that is all documented when they submit the FML paperwork. So we did update our FML internal form that individuals have to complete for that. And in there, it is like, have you received approval? Like, you need to make sure if you're doing intermittent that this has been approved by your department prior to you initiating your FML. That information then is also communicated out to supervisors as well, so that they see that, or I've had a conversation with them in terms of if they've approved that, so that we can make sure that we're approving it from the city standpoint. So I would say in that terms, it's going to be prior to them taking it in a formalized
Great.
capacity.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of paperwork for those situations anyways.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to
and
make sure we
I'm thinking about that too. I would think that, in that moment where you are
notified maybe. and-
notified
yeah.
or you've entered into the foster process, you're hopefully communicating with the people around you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially your supervisor. This could be a very
Might get a
quick-
phone call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And
just limited to foster. I mean, I think it's also a matter of all of a sudden you are on a list for adoption and they say you're getting a kid tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the
welcome.
same kind of, that happens.
yeah. And in that case, like, you're going to call your supervisor, you're going to say, hey, I was just called by
Yeah.
the foster care, I was just called by the adoption agency and I need to take time off. And then you're going to complete the paperwork in terms of what you need to do on a
Great.
longer standpoint.
I-
So I think you're going to be already following either your department normal processes, or we're just saying, hey, from a formal capacity, we just need to make sure that you've gotten approval from your department to be able to do reduced or intermittent.
Oh, you can't adopt that baby.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I would hate to be in a situation where we're not able to send someone to do what they need to do. And because,
Yeah.
so as long as our department heads feel empowered and that we're making, it sounds like overall we're making the FMLA paperwork process easier to understand and navigate from.
That is the
Yeah.
goal,
Textbook.
I think, with a lot of these changes,
Great.
is to try to
I think no matter
simplify.
what you do, it's still going to come back to you anyways.
And then I do have one last question.
Yeah.
Page 25, E6. Why did I say E6? Is it E? Oh, yes.
well, yeah.
Yes, the city may require employees to obtain a second medical certification from a healthcare provider that is selected and paid for by the employee's department. Any concerns about needing to further clarify healthcare provider? As far, I mean, I figure.
Ooh. That's a good point.
Wait, I'm like, oh, there it is.
Oh, sorry.
Okay,
Yeah,
no, I got
very
it. I
bottom
got
of
it.
page
I got
25.
you now.
My only thought was
I think about that.
I think from a city perspective, we're not going to go find a unlicensed naturopath to like ask for the second opinion, but I'm
Actually, we
thinking.
have, and
Oh.
we actually have that in a previous policy somewhere. I tried to think about it, that actually specifically said who qualified to be someone who could do that. And was that coming up on, I don't know when we covered that, but I didn't dream it up.
Yeah, it's real.
I mean, there was real, and there was something that said who qualifies to someone who can approve that.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, so this specifically is, it is a, I mean, it is a require, it's a, oh my gosh, it's not a requirement. It is a provision under the federal family medical leave that as an employer, if you receive, and I'm going to provide just again some random examples. You provide medical certification, and let's say it's from a homeopathic doctor, and we look at it and we say, we have concerns regarding the
Good.
medical certification as a whole as it relates to this individual coming back on the job site, just because of the liability that we have. It gives us the ability, and FML provisions give us the ability to say, we've got concerns, we do need to request an additional certification, but we're going to cover the cost of that because
Okay.
we're asking for it.
Okay.
Good. That makes me feel a ton better about what felt like we were maybe discounting a specific type of medicine.
No.
And I don't want us to
Right.
get in that.
Most of the
Yeah.
time, I think we're not. Like, I mean, from my standpoint, a healthcare provider, we have all kinds of different healthcare
Right.
providers
Right.
that we're going to receive information from. It really would be if there was something that's like,
I'm thinking like an out of country provider is like that.
yeah, I mean, and
So
I think
no,
it would
sure.
it would depend. So it does give employers that to say, ooh, I am concerned, or I actually am aware that this individual has lost their license.
That was my other thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And therefore, this is not a credible healthcare provider that we now need you to get additional.
As long as you've got,
information
on.
as long as you, as the city, get what we need by leaving it as healthcare provider, I'm game. I just wanted to ask if we
I
need
guess the
anything
question,
further.
do you define healthcare provider being someone who is in fact recognized under the state of Idaho?
No, healthcare provider can relate. So healthcare provider is a family medical leave term, and it relates to an individual that is certified based on their type of healthcare that they provide to provide healthcare in whatever capacity it is. Now, would we question if we had a vet as a healthcare provider versus a medical? Yeah, we probably would. That would be a situation where we would say this healthcare provider is not a healthcare provider that deals with humans. Therefore, we're going to need some additional information from you. So it's going to depend.
As long as you get what you need from the federal backing and framework of the healthcare
Yeah.
provider terminology, I'm game. So that was my last question. Any other questions about FMLA or the other sections?
I said,
Nice job.
Did I win in the amount of time that I just?
I was
sorry,
ready. No.
everyone.
I was game.
I said
I love
to
this stuff.
Belknap the other night. Thank you for the minutia.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I'll be
That's-
back.
It's a little
Thinking so.
alarming. Some of these clarifications are alarming. You know, that we were sending people kind of in a little bit of a spin to
Yeah,
this
and-
section and that section.
And sometimes you don't know until you're going through it and looking, and
Yeah.
then you're like, wait a second, why did we do that? And a lot of times there is a rationale behind why you did it.
Sure.
And then if you don't know the intent or you're not the individual that did it, you're like, wait, why
How
did
did
we
we get
do
here?
that?
Yeah.
I have a question for you. This is kind of like, say, for instance, somebody's on a travel trip for the city and they get injured while they're there.
Mhm.
The question is, they may not think that that's really workers' comp. Is there somebody who would call it to their attention that said, by the way, this is a workers' comp issue, you need to file a complaint on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if they were to get injured, depending on the severity of the injury, they're most likely either going to notify their supervisor, like, oh my gosh, while I was there and then I did this. And the supervisor, you would hope, would know to say, ooh, that needs to be. So, again, another area where we're going to have to make sure that we're
Trainings.
doing some training on. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm remembering in that example, I'm remembering a friend at U of I who got injured on a scooter and like broke his foot on a U of I trip.
Oh.
And
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
that's unexpected. So I love it. Okay. Are we comfortable recommending approval of the proposed resolution to amend and repeal sections within chapters 5, 7, and 8 of the personnel policies?
You don't want to do this again?
I
Can
can.
it,
Can it be
go on
consent?
You can.
Okay. I would recommend consent.
Thank you.
We don't
Yeah,
want to sit through that
thank you,
again.
he says.
Heard it, yeah, good.
Back and look at the notes.
I love it.
Watch this video.
Okay, groovy. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank
Appreciate it,
you.
Bonnie. Okay, item number 4 and last on our agenda is the South US 95 Sewer Water Extension Change Order with Bob Bouvell. Hello, welcome back.
And Bob, we actually changed our view that you don't need to go through every minutia.
Yes.
So now all of a sudden the extensive
Gloss over
background. I'll try to shorten that up a little bit.
As I say, the cover letter for the staff report was great. I was going to ask if change orders 1 and 2 were incorrectly referenced in the staff cover sheet in sequence, but we can go through that. I can't remember which one's which in the attachments.
It's possible I might have got through the value for the one into the other. Unfortunately, I didn't print off all the
You're good.
previous
You're
change
good. You're good.
orders
I was
and-
just thinking if there's any concerns when we stick it under the full agenda to quadruple check, but
Okay.
let's do it.
All right. All right. Good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you about the South US 95 sewer water extension project. We are requesting permission to grant some change orders that would exceed the 10% that was previously approved by council. Part of doing that is I wanted to do a kind of a very brief overview of what this project was. This is our South Lift Station. And this is an overlay of the line work of the US 95 reroute project, the Thorn Creek project. The purpose of this project was to get our sewer and water infrastructure underneath of the highway installed prior to the installation of the highway. So through that, we installed about 2,000 feet of sewer line and about 1,000 feet of water line. The sewer line from the lift station down to this intersection and out to that intersection of what is eventually going to be two city streets. The sewer line is excessively deep in that area. We went through kind of an analysis to try to determine whether or not it would be better to install a deeper sewer line in the efforts to forego having to
Digging
build
twice.
another lift station
Oh, okay.
further up this draw that would then head to this lift station. So the sewer line through a good chunk of this project is deeper than what we would normally prefer to do. But
Because
it's
deeper, you're not going to have to
Have
put
a
another.
booster.
we won't have to put in another pump lift station.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, and that it would be able to extend up this draw a ways and should open up a significant amount of this draw to sewer service without having to do any pumping.
Cool.
So I guess a little bit more background I wanted to do. Back in 2021, we awarded the contract to ML Albrights. It was the summer of 21. And once we awarded the contract and gave them the notice to proceed, they started going through the efforts of procuring the materials to build the project. They ran into a lot of issues getting the materials on hand. A lot of supplies were still low due to the COVID issues. And so they ended up having to delay the project into the fall. In addition to that, we had a permitting issue through ITD that also delayed the project a couple of weeks. And as the project continued on, the project ended up getting into the winter months. We had quite a bit of snow during the winter, and even though the contractor was hopeful they'd be able to do some of that work in the winter, it ended up not working. So in May of 2022, the contractor was actually able to start really putting some serious work into this project, and as part of that, we were not able to install our water line prior to the SEL
The
project
tie-in.
installing their water line. SEL was required to install water line along the frontage of what we're going to be calling Old US 95 as part of their project. Initially, we were supposed to have our infrastructure built first, and they would tie into it. What happened was SEL got there first, built their stuff, and there was a slight alignment issue between where they built their water line and where we were anticipating build our water line. So long story short, change order number one, we asked Albrights to do the work to make that connection. And also we wanted to add a couple of water services to a couple of properties that were adjacent to the project. So change order number one was for that work, installing the two commercial water services and then making the connection to SEL's water line.
Does that mean that if we could do it over again, that SEL would have addressed what this change order had the city pay for, or is it more complex than that? I'm just thinking as far as lessons learned.
That portion of the cost was about $7,700 for the alignment issue.
Right.
The bulk of it was the $35,000 was adding those water services to properties on the east side of the highway. So we didn't
Anticipating
have
for
to
future growth.
and not have to excavate the highway roadway in the future.
Got it. Thank
We're
you.
avoiding that cost.
Okay.
Yes. So then change order number two was requested by ML Albrights to adjust some of the unit prices in the contract to reflect the substantial inflation that we were seeing at that time. Through we dug into kind of some of ITD's methods to try to adjust. But a big part of it was fuel prices. Fuel prices just skyrocketed through that time, and so we went through ITD's process of adjusting some of our contract unit prices to match what we would be seeing at the during the time of construction for the increase in fuel prices. And then in addition to that, change order number 2 also deducted some of the work that was required in change order number 1. And actually part of that work that got deducted was the SEL tie-in through communication between SEL's contractor and Albright's contractor. There was some concern about taking responsibility for some of the work, and it ended up being easier to hire SEL's contractor to complete the work. So we actually deducted some of the work that was in change order number 1 out, and this reflects that.
Okay.
And then this is the one that
Doozy.
this is the one that we're here for. Those were fairly small change orders in comparison. So change order number 3 was requested by ML Albright. Once they got into the project and they were dealing with some spring conditions, they were seeing quite a bit of unexpected cave-ins, difficulties with excavation that we wouldn't normally expect to see in our soil conditions. Their initial change order request was for $776,000. We dug into that. Started trying to get a better understanding of how they got there, and through that process, we discovered that they had some requests for loss of production due to rain delays, which our specifications
Exclude from.
exclude weather included delays. So we pulled those out. Some of their requests were due to having to deal with existing utilities that were in the way of the project. Those were labeled in the plans, and we also have provisions in our specifications that prevent them from asking for additional costs due to that. So we worked primarily on the soil, the unexpected soil conditions. So I've included a few of the construction photos to kind of illustrate some of the issues that they were running into.
Is there no way to predict that? I mean, I guess the question is
Were the
that
soil samples not like required for
There,
this?
if we had wanted to spend additional money ahead of time, we could have done some geotechnical investigations.
There was no reason to expect.
So the
we-
question is, would we have to pay for that, or would SEL pay for that?
You mean the contractor?
Yeah.
The contractor.
This
Sorry about that.
even though this project fed SEL and its schedule was somewhat driven by SEL's project, this project actually had very little to do with SEL. This had more to do with getting our utilities built before the highway
ITE.
came in.
Yeah.
Yes. So this metal box here is what we refer to as a trench box. It's made of steel, and it's intended to protect the workers from cave-ins while they're down installing the pipe and doing work. This trench box is what we can actually see in this photo is actually just the top half of the box. This is actually 20 feet deep. So what we can see from here to here is about 10 feet. This trench is actually 20 feet deep. So it's about twice as deep as what you can see in the photo. And what this photo really illustrates, though, is this trench box should be centered more over here in the center of the trench. But when this side collapsed, it hit this trench box, pushed it into the other side, and ended up knocking the pipe that it was protecting out of alignment. So at this point, the contractor then had to disconnect this box, lift it up and out of the trench, had to connect up to the lower box, pull it up out of the trench, and all of this material here that caved in had to be excavated out. And then the pipe had to be replaced in its appropriate spot. So every time not every time, but when some of these cave-ins that were happening, especially if they knocked the pipe off of alignment, definitely derailed work for a significant amount of time. This photo, I chose to put this photo in because it kind of gives a little bit more of an idea of the depth of the trench.
Because what do we normally dig to for a sewer line?
10, 12 is pretty.
It's pretty typical.
Wow.
8, yeah.
We had 20 feet here.
We were at 20 feet here, yes.
Wow.
And in addition to it showing kind of how deep this trench is, I also wanted to point out some of the measures that the contractor was having to go through in order to create a safe work environment for supplying the workers in the trench box with the tools and materials that they needed. That's going to come up later. This photo kind of illustrates what the shape of the trench kind of looks like after some significant cave-ins happen. This is all rock backfill material. We chose to install, or we chose to do all of the backfill with crushed rock because the highway was going to be built over top of these utilities, so that rock, it's easier to backfill, it's easier to get good compaction on, and the chances that we have to deal with settlement later are greatly reduced when we do the rock backfill.
Cool.
And we didn't want to deal with having to be possibly responsible for any settlement of the highway project. So we chose to do all rock backfill.
I do have a question I'm still just like grasping this idea of it being 20 feet deep instead of 10 feet. Did that also increase our cost of materials that we were having to spec for the contractors, or is it pretty interchangeable?
It did increase the cost of the yes. So in the project, we had an additional line item for excavation and rock backfill in areas greater than 12 feet deep. So
A lot of it.
a lot of it. Well, and so what that basically was is we basically specified that installing sewer line at about 12 feet deep would be typical to the project, and that we were paying at a unit price
The additional.
just for the work that they were doing. We were paying an additional amount above 12 feet. The reason in that being, if we needed to add additional sewer, additional pipeline to the project, we didn't want to have to pay an average price that was averaged at 20 feet deep. If we needed to extend the sewer line and it was only going to be 12 feet deep, we didn't want to have to pay the 20-foot price for that. So we
Gotcha.
separated that out.
Okay. That's incredible.
Yeah, I think that was all I wanted to point out in this photo. So this is kind of a drawing that kind of expresses or kind of shows the unusual conditions that we ran into when we went to do this excavation. And a lot of it is coming down to what we're seeing down here. Once we got into the project, we got to about 20 feet deep, roughly about where the pipeline needed to go. We ran into a decomposed bedrock. And what that is it's not solid bedrock. You can still excavate it with an excavator, but it's just big cobbly rocks. But sitting on top of that bedrock was a layer of sand.
No,
That,
this just seems to get worse by the minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
hate to
this-
say that to you, but
the layer of sand was full of water as well. So what would happen is as the contractor would get down to get down to that depth, the water would start flowing out of that sand layer, and it would bring the sand material that was in that layer with it, essentially undermining the sides of the trench that then would give way to that weight would cave in.
Literally undermining. Wow. Okay.
Right. And so this is to kind of illustrate the like how the mechanisms that we ran into
Yeah.
that were unusual to what we would normally see.
Get lots of them.
So-
Was this in any way avoidable other than making it not as deep?
Making it shallow could have been avoided if we had wanted to spend a little bit more money ahead of time and doing more geotechnical investigation. We could have provided the contractor with that information and then would no longer have been able to say that this was an unforeseen or unusual condition.
Right.
But I'm also thinking in terms of if we had gone shallower, what's the cost of a new booster station? Is what I was going to ask. Is if we would have.
You'd be talking 1.5, I think, is
Yeah.
what Eddington is currently looking at for their lift station. But then in addition to that, you're also looking at the city's maintenance costs in perpetuity of a lift station as well.
Right.
So like the
Yeah.
upfront cost is one
Dominoes,
thing,
yeah.
but then you also have to weigh the maintenance of it as well.
Yeah.
So the contractor fought these conditions for about 2 months and got very little production out of their crews during that 2 months. And they came to the city and made a request. They said, we think we might be able to do this faster, get a little bit more production if we eliminate the top trench box and we excavate at a 1-to-1 ratio from the top of the box, essentially making it easier for our excavator to work and allowing them to excavate this material in a different fashion that was more efficient. So because this top portion was going to be laid back at a 1-to-1 slope, OSHA regulations didn't require any trench boxing, and the equipment could just work freely in this area without having to have all the trench boxes. The downside to this is that this area that they excavated here would also need to be backfilled with rock backfill.
Oh, and so I was going to ask, why would they need to ask the city for how they wanted to go about the project?
So
That makes sense.
they
Okay.
asked the city, they said, hey, we kind of want to change our method. But
you'd see more
would you be okay with paying the additional rock prices that we're going to be seeing in order to do this? So I had already had talks with them about helping them out with paying for the additional excavation and rock backfill that they were seeing through the other conditions. I ran some calculations, and if this method worked, we would end up spending less money. So I said, yeah, I agreed that we would help them pay for that rock material if this ends up working. This photo shows kind of how that trench looked after they started using this trenching method, and it increased their productivity. They were almost by 3 times.
I also
they were getting
imagine-
almost 3 to 4 times more work done than the way they were trying to do it before.
I would feel safer working in that than the other one for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. I wouldn't feel safe one way or the other.
Yeah.
20 feet down is still 20 feet down.
enough.
And
Yeah.
there's still,
Just do me a favor. How many more
Undercutting
change
going
orders
on,
do we
yeah.
have here?
This is the last and final change order.
Like, I was just waiting for how many more of this, like.
How many more slides? Yes, I'm very close to being done.
No, you're good. You're good. Don't worry.
No, it was just more like bad news, bad news, bad
Right,
news.
right.
That's what it's really
How
all
many more
about.
plot twists did they see? Yeah.
So through change order number 3, we agreed. I did some calculations based on what I was seeing as a cross section of the trenches, both the new method and the old method, and I calculated around 7,000 cubic yards of additional excavation and backfill being done. The contractor came to brought their weigh tickets, their rock tickets to me, and said, "Hey, we did an additional 7,174 cubic yards of rock backfill." Our numbers were really close, so I felt pretty comfortable that we had a solid understanding of how much extra excavation rock backfill was done for the project. We negotiated with the contractor to determine a price for that extra work, which wasn't fun. We wanted to try to get as close to their just their actual costs of it without getting into too much overhead and price and stuff like that. Through our discussions and negotiations, we came to about $10 per cubic yard of excavation price, and I missed a dollar sign, but $38 per cubic yard of rock backfill. And then we also agreed to pay for 50% of their trench box rental. These trench boxes aren't the typical trench boxes that most contractors would have on hand. They had to rent these ones, and because the project extended longer than expected, they had to pay more in rent.
That
And
feels
we
like
also
a kind compromise if we had already had an exclusionary clause in the contract about weather delays. So
Yeah.
fair enough.
and then we also paid some time and material price for the ripping out the pipe that they had installed and reinstalling after the cave-ins, and those time and material prices came out to that $47,000.
How do they feel? Well, no, I'll park the feelings because I'm just recapping. You had said the original ask that they had come to for reimbursement or payment was $700,000, and after fine tooth comb, we're looking at an offer to pay them a $402,000, right? We went from 700 to 400. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have plans in the near future to go into a 20-foot trench again anytime soon?
It would, in most cases, it would definitely not be what we would want to do. And there was a little bit of a lesson learned in that one. We could have paid a little bit more in geotech investigation. I dug into the drill logs that they had for the lift station when they put that in. Yeah.
I get it.
And there was no mention of a
Indication.
sand layer. Bedrock was what we were mostly concerned with, and there no mention of bedrock or any issues when they installed the lift station. So we kind of went the other direction from doing a geotechnical. Well, it turned out the other side of the creek was a little bit different than what we were seeing on the north side.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, even on a bad day, we would have been spending a heck of a lot of geotech for $400,000.
Well,
Yeah,
and you would have been building the pipe if you wanted to have that depth, if you wanted to be able to serve that basin. Knowing about it just means the contractor would have bid that up front.
Yeah.
So you're paying
Fair
for
enough.
it. You're
Yeah.
paying for it one way or the other.
through the discussions with the contractor, they were confident that if they had known that sand layer was there ahead of time, that they would have bid the project a little pricier.
Yeah.
It's hard to say if that's actually true, but they didn't have the information.
Neither did we.
And we actually did spend in our next big project, which was the water line, the Pullman Road transmission line. That was going to be in a lot of area where we were theoretically going to see some bedrock. And so in that area, we paid some money ahead of time to do some geotechnical investigation to try to eliminate some of these issues.
Seems like a nightmare for you, just in case you're
Yeah,
curious.
thank you for
It wasn't
working through this.
it wasn't fun.
That's an understatement, I think.
So that kind of outlines everything for change order number 3. So this lays out what the original project was. the total changes that we saw and our expected total price at the end of the project is now $1.7 million.
Bill, my question is, where does
Money
this
come from?
extra come from, and what does it mean we are going to have to go without, or what plans does it change for us down the road?
So that'll come out of the sewer capital fund.
Okay.
We currently have accumulation a little over 16 million in that fund, so it will be out of there. We already have 58 million of improvements identified over the next 10 years in the sewer fund, including the next phase 5 treatment, dealing with temperatures and installing chillers for the effluents, as well as UV disinfection.
So it's not going to stop a project from happening, but
No,
it's
we already
gonna-
have,
it's a bummer.
we already have financial issues in the sewer fund. We will likely be exploring the potential issuance of debt to fund the next phase 5, which is fine. We've got capacity. We just paid off one bond series last year, so we do have some debt service capacity within the fund. So this does not make or break. Will be dealing with some funding issues on sewer projects, but we do
that
have
are
the
already
capacity.
larger ticket items than a $400,000
Correct,
hit.
yes.
Okay. Whew, sorry, Bob. So what's our recommendation?
Staff's recommendation is to approve the change order with ML Albrights in the amount of $402,960.
There's no choice.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a,
It's difficult because the work is kind of has already been done. There are choices. We could potentially pursue a
no,
more like a
was being
litigation
facetious.
type of
I was being facetious. Let's be totally
Um,
clear. It seems to me that in order to get this done, and we're like knee deep in it already, or 20,
20 feet deep in it,
and
yeah.
already, it just seems like we got to just completion. We just have to get it done, and it's going to cost us more than we anticipated. But I don't think we have any options. I mean, I mean,
Yeah.
realistic options.
Yeah. And I also am interested in making sure that the people who worked with the city are getting paid so that we continue to have contractor options who want to work with us.
That's
So-
also was a consideration when we were in negotiations with the for the change order
Mhm.
yeah.
was making sure that the contractors that do work with us don't feel like we're going to be completely unreasonable when they run into
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprises.
But I
Unanticipated.
also want us to learn our lessons from this and document, geotech and trench depth from this, because that's a big, that's big. You knew it
Chunk
was
of money.
big coming here. That's alarming.
And I'm just going to hope that it means that as IT gets closer to that intersection, that we don't have any surprises from that side as far as any rework. And maybe, and if anything else, maybe it'll serve as data that they can also learn from with their decisions as they're going. They're not going to need to go 20 feet deep for anything, but yeah. Well,
It's definitely unusual to go that deep. But
They have that many problems.
So many problems.
well, thank
So
you
thank
for wading through all of that with,
I get it.
with us.
and I think my next slide is questions. Yes.
Hey,
So-
any remaining questions?
No, thank goodness. they did.
Okay, how do we feel about recommending approval of the change order number 3 in the amount?
Can we do that if it's that
listed?
big?
You
That's why
can.
it has to come to us because it's more than 10%, right? The contractual
Correct,
piece that
council has
allows
to approve
staff to do
I
it.
think Sandra and Julie, well, Julie was here for part of it. I think Sandra's going to want to see it.
Yeah,
think
I mean,
we
it's
need
a
to put
big
it on
one.
regular. Sorry, Bob. I think that has
But you know, you did a great presentation. I just want to tell you straight up, it was like, oh no, what's going to happen next? I mean, it's like you're looking around every corner and thinking, oh no, what else could go wrong? That was a bad move, but yeah.
What does it look like to put on regular agenda for our next meeting?
Well, we'll have a public hearing for replats. I mean, it could go regular. I guess my preference would be put it on consent, and if a council member wants to request to be pulled, they can.
I'd also like to think that the 40 minutes of interrogation with Bob would serve anybody who wanted to listen to the conversation. I
I can dissent. It doesn't matter if you guys feel like you want to put it on consent. I will disagree gently.
like you'll pull it from the agenda.
I don't know about that. I just disagree that I mean, it's 2-1. That becomes consent then. But I think it needs to go on regular. but that is, I'm one of three.
No, I'm thinking as far, I hear you as far as what it looks like and making sure that we've done due diligence to give opportunity for visibility. And I think I'd be open to it being, you want
Well,
on regular?
No, no,
Only
I,
one.
no, but. I think
Which one,
that's
where do you
mistaken.
want it?
I think it should go on the general, the regular one.
regular.
And I was going to say consent. So it's 2 against 1. I'm okay with it going on general agenda. Bob, we will see you again for all of these lovely photos.
This was a dress rehearsal.
As long as it doesn't, and I guess if it's on consent either way, that doesn't change when the payment is able to get issued. So I'm happy. Right.
Right,
Doesn't
So,
right.
impact that.
So in part, I guess the answer is it's such a significant amount of money that it may just,
Completely
it's
right.
let people go through it.
Yeah.
And
see what our wonderful staff is doing to to mitigate risk and surprise expenses. So, full agenda, please. Any further anything before we adjourn? Beefy agenda. Thanks, everybody.
you know,
Appreciate
it's so
it.
interesting. I don't think I've ever had a meeting this long.
Only 3 agenda items.
Yeah, really.